Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Alex Cowan, and the exercise we're going to do today is called Day in the Life. Before we start, let's talk a little bit about this discipline of design thinking. If you've already done Venture Design 1, you may want to skip ahead to where we actually start the exercise. Design thinking has these two pillars, empathy and creativity. So someone back when went and observed the seamstress and noticed that she could use a much better cutting implement and ultimately created the sewing scissor. Ultimately, personas are human depictions of your customer. And one of the first questions I ask my students is, what kind of shoes would your persona wear? Not because, of course, that's actually important in and of itself, but it turns out that for the hundreds of little decisions you need to make about how to create product and promote product to your customer, it's that human understanding that's actually the most efficient way to make informed, vivid, discussable, and ultimately testable decisions about what to do. Well, one good checklist for the underlying quality of your personas is this idea of varied. So, first of all, good personas are vivid. You should be able to hand this persona to someone because remember, these aren't just for your own consumption, but for you to ultimately use with collaborating with your team. Not everybody can go out and see customers and observe them the way that you can as the product owner. So you should be able to make someone feel after looking at your material and your persona that they've met this person, they have this intuitive understanding that if they didn't know if you hadn't said what kind of shoes they wear, that they'd be able to hazard a good guess. Doesn't mean they'd be right, means they would be able to infer that, for example. They should be actionable. The purpose of personas is to inform what you're going to build and how you're going to sell your product. So if they're not doing that for you, then you should step back and look at the construction of the personas and the way that you're organizing those discussions. Good personas are real. They come from real observations about real people in the real world that you take back and encapsulate for consumption by your team. They're identifiable because if after the fact you can't go out and market to these personas in a coherent way, then they're really not actionable for most companies. They're exact. Everyone is not your customer, and even if everyone is your customer, like washing machines maybe or chewing gum, or I mean, of course, everybody's not the customer for those, but they have very broad bases. Even if that's the case, there are still individual chunks of personas that are going to be bigger, more important focal parts of your market. And if you're doing something fundamentally innovative and new, personas are very important for helping you identify your early market and your progression through that early market into the mainstream market. And finally, good personas are detailed. People are complicated, and every persona is, of course, a humongous simplification of who all these people really are. But even to get an inkling of that, you need a fair amount of detail. And we talked in Venture Design 1 about how that looks. Pictures, scrapbooks, sentences and paragraphs rather than bullet points. Those are how you get nice, detailed personas. And personas ultimately are an operational asset. So a woman in an office building, well, she is one persona to the company whose accounting software she uses, and she's another persona to the company whose hiking boots she wears. They both want to know what fundamentally makes her tick, but one cares in more detail about what she does at her day job, the other more about what she does in her free time. Think, See, Feel, Do is a good way to get that operational view of the personas. So, what does this woman think about accounting? What does she see others doing and read about? What is she? How does it make her feel to crunch the numbers, use the accounting software she uses now? Does she feel frustrated and like it's a burden placed on her that she has to use this thing, or does she feel like it helps her? These are things you want to sort out because if you can't make an underlying emotional connection with your customer, or your user, you're not going to be able to get them to do very much. And do is the last item. I mean, these are the things that we can actually observe or infer that the persona is doing. To get at the real substance of what you're doing, we use problem scenarios, and these help your personas become more actionable and more detailed. By problem scenario, I mean, in an enterprise context, what underlying fundamental jobs are you doing for the customer? In a consumer context, what are the underlying needs or desires that you're going to deliver on? Then from the problem scenario, we make sure that we understand the current alternatives. So if you're going to build an enterprise app that replaces a bunch of spreadsheets, go take a look at those spreadsheets and see how the customer uses them. What are they trying to do with them? What language do they use to describe the different areas that you're looking at? And let's say we're going to do an app for parents to distribute allowances to kids. Well, go and look at the refrigerator board or whatever where they keep track of that. Those are examples of personifying those alternatives. And then you're looking at your value propositions, and the key question you're asking is, are my value propositions better enough than the current alternatives at delivering on these problem scenarios? And with this, you can actually thread all that into sort of a testable hypothesis about your product, a product hypothesis, that a certain persona exists, they have these certain problem scenarios that are important to them, where they're currently using such and such alternatives, and we have a value proposition that's better enough than the alternatives where they're going to buy our product, use our site, whatever. And that said, the main thing that most future design thinkers struggle with, at least the ones that come to my classes, are being vivid and being real. So this is where we're going to talk a little bit about the underlying creation of personas. So this is a bad persona, not varied. First of all, the stock, this is a stock photo from the internet, not real. The Going up to the top of that list, you can see this is a huge range, age 28 to 45. So it's not very exact, vivid, or detailed. And all this stuff's laid out in bullet points, which aren't very good at telling stories, which is, stories are vivid, stories are detailed. And finally, they said 70% would like to use the application. This is a response to a questionnaire. This is sort of false actionable. Customers will always tell you they like their product, so be careful with questionnaires. Marry the mom. This is a somewhat better persona. You can see here that the marry the mom helps a little bit, and every little bit helps with the vividness thing. Down at the bottom, you can see, well, this is a photo taken with an iPhone out in the real world, which is where you should be when you're creating personas. And while this is just a little snippet of the persona description, you can see that these sentences and paragraphs are delivering on that idea of being vivid and being detailed. And there's some behavioral notes in there too, like she uses Facebook so many times a week, and those little details help with identification. That they're actionable ways to sort of filter these people out and go find them. Now we're going to do the actual day in the life exercise. So what we're going to do is, I have 6 personas, and we're going to look at a few photos from each of them, which is not a complete persona. It's just a little chunk snippet. And then I'm going to ask you a few questions about each persona. And there are no right answers, but there's a right process. And the right process is inferring your answer and being able to describe that inference from what you've seen in the photos. And the idea, the goal of this exercise is to give you a sense of what it looks like, what it feels like to create real, vivid personas. So this is our cast of personas that we're going to look at. Sally the single mom is the first one. It's a day in the life for Sally. She wakes up between 5:30 and 6. She's woken up by one of her 2 young kids. First thing she does is she's really tired, so she drags herself out of bed and puts the coffee on. And then she starts making breakfast for the kids. She moves on to getting them ready, washing them, bathing them, clothing them, sorting their hair out, getting them dressed. And all this culminates in they're strapped into the car, they have their stuff for school, they're ready to go to school. She works at a framing shop as a manager, so she spends some of her time on the shop floor, some of it on the retail floor, and some of it at her office doing paperwork. And her guilty pleasures during the day are snacks, and she really likes sports, so she looks at the ESPN app and sometimes texts with her friends about sports during her breaks. Right after work, she heads home, makes dinner for the kids. That's around 6 o'clock that happens. She doesn't usually eat with the kids because she's not really hungry and she's making sure they have what they need and so forth. That's followed by getting the kids ready for bed, bathing, story time, and then she does some housework, eats, watches TV, probably Sports Center or ESPN. Um, and before bed, she likes to have some tea, read Sports Illustrated, which is a sports magazine. She likes sports, and she usually goes to bed between 10:30 and 11. These are the things that she carries around with her during the day: a smartphone, some gum, some chapstick, some sunscreen, presumably for the kids, a lighter, a small penknife, some Advil, and some bottled water, or rather a bottle of water. If she had 3 extra hours where she wasn't obliged to do anything, she would go either fishing out in the woods. She likes to enjoy nature, especially in the spring and summer, or she'd go to a sports bar, watch sports. She's not a big drinker, but it's fun to watch sports with other adults, and she likes bar food a lot. So here are some questions about Sally, the single mom, and I'll run through them. But you as an individual, if you're looking at this by yourself or with your group, you guys should sit down and take turns answering these questions. There are no right answers, and if one person says A, one person says B, don't there's no nobody you don't have to disagree. There's different perspectives on this persona that could be equally valid. So don't worry about trying to I would not worry about trying to agree on an answer per se. So here are a few questions. What's her favorite kind of music, and why? Why do you think that? Same thing with her favorite band or composer. Why? Where did she buy their last pair of shoes? What's the last movie she saw? What did she drink with dinner last night? And if she had a dog, what kind of dog would it be? The magazine question in this case is a bit of a giveaway. So I'm going to pause for a second if you want to pause and run through this. And now we'll move on. So our next persona is Miguel, the mid-millennial. So he's a younger guy. He usually wakes up between 8:20 and 8:30. He's a snoozer, so he sets two alarms, one that turns off, and then one that he just wakes up against. He usually when he gets up checks his smartphone. He looks at Instagram, he looks at Twitter, he looks at Facebook, see what's going on with his friends. Snapchat is another one. He's very healthy, so he usually cooks a high protein breakfast with some vegetables, so usually eggs, sausage, spinach. Heads to work. He lives in the Los Angeles area, so he's got a long commute. And one thing he does is puts in phone calls. He talks to his family because that's important to him, but he's also got all these personal projects, creative and business stuff that he's working on where he'll call his collaborators and work on things, make plans for later, stuff like that. And he works at the Apple store, so he gets there, helps set up, and he's a manager. His job is kind of like being the host at a party. So his job is to make sure that both the customers and the employees are having a good time, things are going right, and if they're not going right, to figure out what's wrong and fix that. Make sure everybody's having a good experience. After work, he's very into fitness, so he goes to the gym. He works out. Often he meets his girlfriend there, but they work out separately. This is his me time to relax and wind down, think, and kind of connect with himself. Before bed, he eats a very healthy dinner: vegetables, usually chicken breasts, some vegetables or fruit rather for dessert, and sometimes some yogurt if he gets hungry. So sometimes he'll have that yogurt as a snack when he comes home. Then he's working on personal projects, meeting up with his friends. He's got some music projects going, and he also does some editing for some friends, as well as for his own music. And then he's got an app that he's building with a couple of friends, so sometimes he'll go meet them. These are the things that he carries around with him: wallet, some money, his headphones, watch, and a lighter. And if he had 3 extra hours, he would work on his music projects. That's what he's most passionate about. So, same questions about Miguel. Now, I'm going to pause here while you answer these questions, then I'll move on. So, our next persona, is Umberto, the undergrad. So, he's a little younger than Miguel. He's in college. He's studying art and design and filmmaking. He wakes up Actually, at all different times. It kind of depends on his class schedule. His room's got all sorts of stuff in it. AV equipment like cameras and whatnot, a Game Boy, lots of books that he's checked out from the library. He when he goes to school, he lives in the Santa Cruz area, which is very hilly. So he puts his bike on the bus, gets to school that way, which is uphill, and then when he's going home, he just rides downhill. So at school, he's got a whole mix of activities. So he's in the lab. That's a 3D printer there. They have some um, living art projects he's working on at the moment. He's in the shop class a lot, building things, creating things. And then he's in the lecture hall at traditional classes. After school, he usually have a snack. He lives in a shared house, and they all chip in for food. He'll chill out. You can see his backyard there, and and relax with his friends. When he's doing his homework, that's usually in the hours before bed. He sits in the living room, listens to music, and watches movies on his computer while he does his homework. These are the things he carries around with him. So a lighter, a book, a wallet, a USB drive where else his projects are on, a bottle of water, and his watch. And if he had 3 extra hours, he'd work on an art project. That's what he's really into. That's an example of that is what you see here. So here are the questions, same questions about Umberto the undergrad. I'm gonna pause, and then I'm gonna move on. So our next persona is Luke, the late millennial. So he's younger than both Miguel and Umberto. He is going from middle school to high school. So he usually wakes up pretty early, like around 7 a.m. to go to school. Packs his bag. His mom prepares breakfast for him. They're staying healthy. Usually has a smoothie. Feeds the dog. Heads to the car. He gets a ride, although sometimes he walks to school. At school, he's got the usual activities. They have recess where he socializes. And after school, he usually goes home, has a snack, does his homework, and then he has an iPad where he likes to watch things on YouTube. He also listens to music on YouTube. And before bed, he sets the table for dinner. That's his chore. He helps out. Then he brushes his teeth, hits the hay. So same questions about Luke. I'll pause, and I'll move on. Trent the Techie is in his late 20s. He's a freelance designer, engineer, marketer, does a lot of SEO work. He wakes up at all different times. So he likes to work late, and he's on sort of an eccentric schedule. He lives at home with his dog sleeps with them. When he wakes up, he usually heads to Chick-fil-A because you can get something to eat there all different times of the day. It's quick, it's easy. They serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And working at home, he's on the computer a lot, both listening to music as well as working on digital projects. During breaks, he likes to play the piano, which is something he learned as a kid. And he loves to watch movies on his computer, usually on Netflix. This is his gear that he carries around with him. And so same questions about Trent the Techie. So our last persona is Bob the baby boomer. Bob's in his late 60s, early 70s. He's semi-retired. He was a lawyer at his own law firm. So he kind of helps out with his wife's projects. He's got a personal trainer who's got him on a diet for peanut butter toast, and coffee is healthy for him. So he usually wakes up, feeds the dog. If his wife's there and available, they'll have breakfast together. Otherwise, he eats by himself and reads the papers, looks at his stocks. He loves to read the news, see what's going on in the world. Some days he'll head to the office and help out and kind of check in. He still does a lot of rainmaking and socializing and talking about business stuff with clients and partners. At the office, his guilty pleasure is words with friends. And he does a lot of workplace, so meeting friends for social things, but also talking about business stuff, deals, clients, stuff like that. He does a fairly structured workout routine so he can stay healthy and prolong both his life and the quality of his life. Spends a lot of time playing tennis, hanging out at the beach. He understands how to relax, especially at this point. And then he'll usually prepare dinner at home for him and his wife. So same questions about Bob the baby boomer. I'll pause and then we'll close. So my work is in this area of venture design, and strong personas and design thinking is really the foundation element of that. If we look at the process, the first thing that I recommend people creating new products start with is this use of personas. So who are we selling to? Who is using our product? Then we look at these problem scenarios and alternatives, what we're going to deliver on those, and then we structure these lean startup style assumptions against those. So what are all the things that have to be true for this to work? And then how do we go out and discover and experiment to prove or disprove those things and iterate before we run out of time and money? If we're going to build something, we use agile user stories and wireframes. They do a good job of encapsulating all this and packaging it for discussion with an implementation team. That's the topic of Venture Design 5. And what we're driving to is this moment where we say, all right, we're going to revise this or can it, or hey, this is looking pretty good. Let's make intelligent investments in scaling this up. Now, I'm aware that not everybody gets to start, from the very beginning with some of these tools. So let's look at the whole thing in reverse. When we build something or build a piece of promotion, we're looking at, did this implementation deliver on the agile user stories that we created? Then we look at, how did the customer react to it? And that's our discovery. And as we observe those results, we think about, did our implementation deliver on the value proposition that we assumed was important to the customer or not? And how are we going to know? This is an important thing to begin with. How are we going to know if that's true or untrue? What metrics will we use? Then we're looking at, we're peeling back the onion because we're not sure, something's not working. We look at, was that problem really important to our persona, and do we know what makes them tick? And that's really the core of our product development process, using this technique of venture design. Thanks for joining me. This URL is where you'll find the workshop page. The venture design materials are here. Startup Sprints is a program you can use with your team to move through this material in a structured way. And this is my contact information. I hope you'll consider giving this stuff a try. And if you do, I hope you'll let me know how it goes. Thanks for joining me.